Free speech is the fist, and the fist stops becoming free and harmless when it comes close to the nose. So the free speech that does not harm another individual continues to be free.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the Books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Ladies and gentlemen, Queen Elizabeth has passed. Long live the King. We pause a moment to show our respects, and I will lift a dram of my best Scottish whiskey. To the Queen and the new King. And now I say welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and 10 other books. If you like what this show is doing, go ahead and tell a friend. You can subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. If you want to support our work or sponsor a show, get yourself to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and journalistic independence. And again, that is theedwinblackshow.com/support. We have solidarity today, as we do every week, from many national organizations. And these include the Emerson Family Foundation, the Fuel Freedom Foundation, Stand With Us, JNS, the Israeli American Council, EMET, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, ZOA Michigan, the Growth Family Center, and many others. Today's episode is sponsored without conditions by members of the Jewish community of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Thank you. Today, we welcome guests from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the villages: Newton, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, and Tampa, Florida. Overseas, let's see, I see viewers logged on from Spain, Australia, I see Holland, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, Japan, Israel, Mexico, and other countries. Special shout outs go to Margot in Pennsylvania for assistance to the show, and Harvey in Florida for continuing strength. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing. We speak frankly and without partisanship to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I zoom out. And now for Unanswered Questions 7. The stuff you asked about, but we previously had no time to answer. I'm loaded down with more than 24 questions from around the country and overseas, and we welcome right now more questions live. Pop them in Zoom's QA feature or the chat. Don't preach or teach, just outreach. And now, caution to the winds and straight talk from me to you. Okay. Loaded. From the watch party in the villages. You gave lots of excellent history on the FBI's infamous misdeeds, but did not mention what James Comey did to Hillary Clinton's election bid just days before the election and the suppression of Hunter Biden's laptop. Yes, that's true. As I said during my show on the FBI, I just only had an hour, and we actually went well over the hour if you think of all the questions that I had. And you could actually spend 2 or 3 shows on all the misdeeds of J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. Now, this does not discredit the fine, heroic men and women of the FBI in the field, but the hierarchy, the ones who have floated to the top, who have become politicized, who have allowed their esteemed organization to become weaponized, This has been a plague on our country, and everyone sees it now. I'll give you some examples that I wrote down here. By now, we all know that Zuckerberg of Facebook, his crew got an advance notice from the FBI to block the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was legitimate and was germane. And this was certainly interference in the election. According to Senator Grassley, Washington Field Office Assistant, Special Agent in Charge Timothy Tebow, disregarded agency guidelines requiring substantial factual predication to trigger investigations while declining to move forward with other investigations despite proper predication. That means you need evidence and you need a probable cause. T-Bolt and also Richard Pilger, director of the Election Crimes Branch within the FBI's Public Integrity Section, reportedly were instrumental in the opening of the investigation into the Trump campaign, which we know was bogus. It was based on fake evidence, which was planted by people working with the FBI. And I'm still quoting here, its associates based in substantial part that they allegedly scrubbed and diluted details of the source material to make it seem like political bias was not in the underlying materials. This guy, T-Bolt, suddenly resigned a couple of days ago and retired a few days ago and was walked out of the FBI building by security. So there's a lot to tell, and we can only scratch the surface. The watch party in Newton, Massachusetts. California recently decided to ban gasoline cars by 2035. Was this another climate-based overreach? It wasn't a climate overreach. It's the right thing to do, but it's way late. It's being done in a very poor fashion. When I say it's way late, those who have worked with me on trying to get off of oil, who have worked with me for the past decade or so, know that many European countries and Asian and African countries have already pledged years ago to get off of oil and forbid internal combustion machines, oil burning machines within their midst. Now, I've got an example here. In 2018, that's almost 5 years ago, Denmark banned all internal combustion machines, not by 2035, but by 2030, and expects to have at that time more than 1 million EVs and hybrids on the road. I see that Austria is planning to ban them by 2040, Azerbaijan by 2040, Belgium in part by 2026, and fully by 2029, Cambodia by 2040, Canada, where Sharon is now, she's listening, hello Sharon, by 2035, Chile by 2035, Costa Rica by 2050, what's gonna take you so long? And I've even got one here, an interesting one, Indonesia plans to ban them by 2040. So there's about several dozen countries in total. But here's the thing, folks. If you think that these countries are just going to ban these cars 15 to 20 years from today, I say, call me and we'll find out what the special delay mechanisms are. Another thing to bear in mind, once they ban the cars, then you have to worry about a scrappage rate of approximately 10 to 15 years. So that's another 10 to 15 years for the existing cars to go out of service. And where do they go out of service to? Well, they go out of service to third world countries, which adds another 10 or 20 years to the cars, especially if some of those cars are in Cuba. We also need to understand that these electric vehicles that we care about so much need electricity. Now, where do they get electricity? Well, right now, 60%, actually more than that, 61% of all electricity in the United States comes from fossil fuels. That's right. And approximately 38% is natural gas and 21% is coal. So according to recent figuring, California is going to need 10 more nuclear reactors, 10 more nuclear reactors between now and 2030 to sustain the tens of millions of electric cars it's going to have on the road. I don't think that's going to happen, and I think you're going to see plenty of unionists and politicians say, well, we have to delay another 5 or 10 years. Plus, I believe personally, based on the research that I have done, that EVs are only part of the situation. There's ethanol, which is very important, and that can power 10, 20, 30, 40% of the internal combustion machines in the United States. Electricity can be generated from seawater once it's treated and once it's dispensed. As I ran a car on water, it was a hydrogen car, an off-the-shelf Chevrolet. I filled up at Santa Monica Boulevard. Hydrogen is an important idea. There's propane, there's natural gas. There are tens of millions of cars that are running on natural gas. The point is, there's not just one solution, there's many, but the people who are making our decisions for us are hooked on these simple, shiny notions. Thank you for that question, Newton. Next question. Watch party in Chicago. We in Chicago want to know if you are the same Edwin Black who covered the jazz and blues scene in Chicago. Yes, I'm the same Edwin Black. I used to review music for the Chicago Tribune, for the Sun-Times, for Downbeat magazine, for Country Music magazine, international musician. I covered jazz, rock, the Chicago Symphony, classical, just everything you could think of. Music is part of my life. I love it. And I established quite a following there. And I've made lifelong friendships from the musicians that I knew at that time. Theodore in Santa Clara, that's California. Your work was discussed in class last week, and you were described as both a bleeding heart liberal and a staunch conservative based on your human rights writings and public statements. Which is it? Whichever it is, please keep up the good work. Okay, so this is a fascinating question, and I can say this. Nobody knows if I'm a conservative or a liberal, because the fact is I do not like those terms and those labels. I do not stand for conservative causes or liberal causes. I stand for human rights. I stand for the underdog. I stand for justice. Recently, one of my closest associates in Brooklyn said, "Oh, anyone who watches your show knows you're a conservative." Another close associate in San Francisco at the same time says, "Well, you're a conservative, and I'm a liberal, but I like to support your work." Guys, nobody on this show thinks that I'm a conservative. I stand up for what's right. I've never given a penny to a conservative political cause. I'm not involved with that stuff. Just in the last several days, I was quoted in the LA Progressive newspaper on eugenics. Amnesty International just reached out to me to participate in a special documentary involving privacy issues, and we have a great show on privacy next week with Sharon Polsky over in Calgary. And it's just rank silliness to think that I'm either a conservative or a liberal. I can tell you that for many years of my life, I've stood up for the victims of the Armenian Holocaust. That is not a conservative cause. I've stood up for the genocide against the Herero natives in Namibia by the Germans just before World War I. That is not a conservative cause. I've worked for more than a decade to get the world off of oil. That's not a conservative cause. So I'm neither a conservative or a liberal. And I get a great big giggle when the liberals call me ultra-conservative and the ultra-conservatives call me ultra-liberal. I stand up for those who have experienced injustice under any label. Thank you, Theodore. Edward in New Orleans. I was outraged by the college debt relief package for couples earning up $250,000 a year or $1 million in 4 years, which equals the time one spends in college? Was this a cheap bribe for votes to rally the Biden base? Yes, Edward, it was a cheap, illegal vote-getting measure by Joe Biden to give couples earning $250,000 a year, as you say, $1 million during the course of their college tenure, a freebie, and in so doing, support the last horizon, the last vestige of unreformed corruption in the United States, meaning the college scene. I think that we're soon going to be doing a story, an episode on colleges. And can you imagine paying somebody $50,000, $60,000 a year for 4 years and getting no marketable skills out of it? That's what we see. There is no prohibition against a rich boy who attended Harvard or Yale. It makes no difference if you're an underprivileged kid and went to the community college here in Montgomery County in Maryland. I think it's an atrocious disservice to the United States. It's quite illegal. I doubt that even one of these will go into effect before they're stopped by law, but it's a great observation. And yes, I paid all of my student loans and much of my daughter's student loans. And I know that many of my listeners have also paid and are still paying their student loans. Harvey in Tampa. Hey, Harvey. Going back decades, Jewish leadership marched for civil rights side by side with Black leadership. How did we lose that relationship, if ever we had a meaningful one, and how can we repair it? There is much to be done on the leadership level, and then there are people on the ground. Well, you're very right. And by the way, everyone, I'll be in Tampa for a 3-day series next month in October. I'll be announcing more of that later. I'll be at the University of Southern Florida. I'll be at Call on Me, and I'll be giving a leadership briefing to the Federation. So I remember back in the day in the 60s when Jesse Jackson was running around, and Jesse Jackson at that time was called Jetstream Jackson by the Chicago media. And I personally was involved in investigating his operation, which I believe was called the Rainbow Coalition at that time, and the shakedowns that were being done against businesses in Chicago. And I remember the time his lawyer flew in to Springfield, Illinois, to get them to open up their corporate offices just before dawn so they could file back reports that had never been filed that I had exposed that meant that their companies would be disallowed retroactively. Things started to shift in the 60s and 70s, especially starting around 1967. And at that time, I remember suddenly seeing civil rights conventions, resolutions, and conferences asking not only for equal rights for Black women, for medical services, jobs, employment, educational opportunities, but mixed in amongst all that was that Israel needs to be kicked out of the Middle East and Palestine needs to be restored. And I kept saying to myself, what the heck has Palestine got to do with the south side of Chicago? And as we went along over the years, you always see Palestinian flags and Palestinian organizations infiltrating and weeding their way into what we would traditionally call civil rights groups to try to focus them against Israel and against Jews. Now, in addition, there have been Jewish abrasions with their Black neighbors. And this has also caused a problem, especially when there are apartments to rent, when there are neighbors running around who sometimes are unkind to their less fortunate neighbors. There are local stores being run. But the same manifestation of discomfort that Blacks had with Jews in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they also had with the Lebanese, with the Caribbean, with the Afro-Caribbeans, with Armenians and Greeks, whoever was running the local enterprise. because only 12% of the country is African American, maybe 11%, maybe 13%, and many of them are concentrated in the cities. This is where they run into Jews and there are conflicts. How do we get out of it? We have to keep slugging away at it. The blacks and the Jews both have a history of slavery. The blacks and the Jews have both been discriminated against in this country. Remember, when you tried to go to the Breakers, the fancy resort in Palm Beach, it said no Jews or dogs. The same thing was on the South Shore Country Club when my father went to work there. We've all had discrimination, and the Jews were the enablers, were the empowerers, were the energizers of the civil rights movement. In large measure, because so many Jews were thrown out of Germany, they got their jobs in historically black universities. It's a big job, and it's being mishandled by the current Jewish leadership. So thank you very much, Harvey, and I hope that answers your question, and this will answer it further. There's nothing we can do with a program to bring blacks and Jews together. It's only in your heart. Just you as a person, man to man. Remember that. That goes for you too, Anti-Defamation League. Peter Marcia in Los Angeles. Why only you on your FBI show last time you ran it? Why were there no experts on your panel? I had 4 or 5 people in the security world, all of whom agreed with the premise of the show that the FBI at the higher echelon could not be trusted, and all of them were afraid to appear. And these are big names that you would know, they're on television, et cetera, et cetera. So I did it myself. Let's take Sharon here in Calgary. If all vehicles will be electric and can be remotely programmed, they can also be turned off remotely. We don't want to go where the government doesn't. You might have a situation where you are not allowed to go if the government doesn't want you to go. That's an important point, and one that I brought out during my last show. Actually, it was 2 shows ago when we had a green reality checklist. And you have to understand, the hostman of Newcastle controlled all the coal in England, and the sheiks of OPEC controlled all the oil in the Middle East. And now you're gonna find 2 or 3 guys with keyboards who are gonna be able to stop cars at a moment's notice, or perhaps the government will pass a law or a rule or a regulation that during certain times in crisis, people can't move. And so this is a real worry that I expressed, that you are now expressing, and we need to talk about it further in a future show because it's very, very important. The level of ignorance about alternative energy sources is astronomical and may one day be fatal. Marlene in Austin, how many books did you publish this year? What is your best-selling book, and what is your advice to an aspiring author? Well, I have 200 editions, and this year I spent a lot of work on my foreign editions and updating old editions. So I would say that in April, the Japanese edition of War Against the Weak came out, the translation. I understand that a copy is on its way to me. I've never seen one, and it might be here today or tomorrow. If the doorbell rings, they'll bring it down to me, and you'll see it at the same time that I see it. I had the Portuguese edition of Transfer Agreement, which was published in Brazil, and just now we're putting up a new iteration of first bestseller, The Transfer Agreement. Next year, I've got at least 3 or 4 books that I plan to publish, and the first one will be on petropolitical Mosul, and the second one, I believe, will be Black Victims of Nazi Policy. Thank you for the question. Oh, here, you say, what is your advice to an aspiring author? And what's your best-selling book? My best-selling book in the world is IBM. My best-selling book in the United States is War Against the Weak. So it's IBM and the Holocaust, which can be got at Amazon or anywhere else, and War Against the Weak. in the English-speaking world. Now, what advice do you give to an aspiring author? I got a lot of people ask me, what advice do you give to an aspiring author? And I'll give it to you straight. Don't do it. Do not do it. First, I've never met a single person in my half century of book publishing in the book field who I would consider trustworthy. You'll be exploited. There'll be no one you can trust. And in addition, once you are an author and you're reaching a global audience, an audience of permanence, a record that will outlive you and an impact that will outlive you, you no longer belong to you and your family, you belong to humanity. And so unless you've got enough drive and enough talent to overcome all of those negatives and live poor, then I would not become an author. It doesn't mean you can't get a typewriter, but remember, not everybody with a typewriter is an author, and not everyone who sits at a piano is a concert pianist. Thank you, Marlene in Austin. Tim R. in Raleigh, North Carolina. I understand for the Trump raid, they only considered the chief archivist with regard to confidential top secret documents, but no one in the intelligence community. And the intelligence community only began examining these top secret documents some days after the raid. Well, that's very true. Now, the archivist is the chief paper shuffler of the United States. Makes every decision about folders. Are they green folders or manila folders? And what record groups mean. I've worked in many archives. I've labored long and hard in the National Archives. I've worked very closely with many of the key archivists in the United States, in Washington, Chicago, and other cities. Why they never went to the intelligence community for an assessment to validate the supposition of the National Archivist. I don't know if he's in a position to evaluate what is and what is not classified and overclassified and underclassified. You know, you could have a 700-page report with one paragraph in it or one sentence that refers to something that is classified, and the entire document gets classified. And then the Washington Post can say, they've always got 700 pages of classified documents, but there's only one sentence in there. And it's possible it was declassed. It kind of makes me think that the FBI might then go to the White House chef to see if Trump had stolen a souffle and use that as a basis to raid his house. Now, let's look at this. This was the presidential retreat for 4 years. Highly sensitive, classified documents were in Mar-a-Lago for 4 years. At that time, they had a secure location to look at those. The place is surrounded by armed Secret Service guys. And Trump is being accused of looking at some of these documents, which he was involved in, which he has a right to look at, but not looking at them in the room here, but his desk around the corner. Plus, somehow, these are the most sensitive documents in the United States, but it's all leaked about so-called nuclear stuff to the Washington Post and the New York Times. Where's the investigation of that? So I'm having a problem with it, and I think that soon there will be an investigation of the investigators. There are many legal experts, including former Attorney General Barr, who believe this is a very righteous raid, and there are many other legal investigators like Jonathan Turley who think that this was a total sham and should never have been done the way it was done. In my view, it was not necessary to have a raid with a gunship, a machine gun on the boat with 45 seconds notice to the staff and illegally asking the people in Mar-a-Lago to turn off the cameras and asking people to get out of the house, including attorneys. I don't believe any of this was necessary. When you have presidential papers, when scores of boxes are being packed by the GSA, by assistants, people are throwing stuff in, especially at the last moment in December and January during the turnover period when there was a question how willing was Trump going to be to leave his house. A lot of stuff was done at the last minute. I didn't believe that Trump would run around and said, oh, looky here, here's a classified document. I think I'll put this in the box. That's not how things work. And of course, we see the unequal justice in the fact that Hillary Clinton had at least 11 classified documents on her server. She just put out a tweet saying there were none. Go to the FBI.gov page, and the statement by Director Comey says she had 11. Of course, 30,000 other emails belonging to the government were deleted. Thank you for your question, Tim. Leonard in Indianapolis, what is your opinion of the gender and pronoun thing? It's just control. Just control. Every person needs to be respected, and every person needs to be addressed in the fashion that they wish to be addressed. If you look at Jews around the world, some of them call themselves Israelites, including in Latin America. Many of them call themselves Hebrews, and many of them call themselves Jews. If you go to Jewish congregations around the United States, you see the word Israelite and Hebrew and Jewish all over the place. I remember when I was just starting out with my friends in the Black community, the word was Negro, and things changed. Language changes. Even though we had the Negro College Fund, which is still a major source of pride for the African American community, they want to be called African American. Then they want to be called Black. You have to respect what people want. Women were at some time wanted to be called Ms. That's language changes. I have spent my entire career helping to change language, but language must appeal to the individual, and trying to force people to use a certain term like MX or Latinx. I keep reminding one of my friends that MX was a missile. And unless someone really wants that name, you don't have to use it. Now, the language has always been a means of forcing your will upon other people. Stalin wanted everyone to be called comrade. The Nazis had their terms, forcing people to use it. They used the word commissar. On occasion, there has been stigma attached to certain names and dignity attached to certain names. This evolves. Being forced to artificially talk about gender or pronouns is wrong, and there are no pronouns in my organization. And there's no move in my organization to rewrite and republish thousands of pages of my books which use proper pronouns. And in fact, there are millions of books which are using traditional pronouns. Yes, they can change. In my first iteration of Banking on Baghdad, which was done back in about 15 years ago, we used the word Muslim, M-O-S-L-E-M, and people said, okay, when you're doing your update, it's time to call them Muslim, because they prefer that, M-U-S-L-I-M. I know people of all religious pursuits. I know people of all gender pursuits, men, women, men who prefer to identify with women. And I spent a great deal of my life, several decades ago, studying the works of John Money at Johns Hopkins on gender identity. And I understand the physical differences, the mental differences, and we must be sympathetic to them. A couple of days ago, I gave a closing comment, and I think I said, in peacetime, sons bury their fathers, and in war, fathers bury their sons. And someone I respect said, no, it should not be that. It should be children. It should be parents. That's not how I wanted to say it. If I want to say it lyrically and appeal to that little bit of Shakespeare in you, then I'm going to do it. I don't want to be coerced. So hope that helps. And if you've got a gender comment, send it to me. I'll be happy to see it. Razy in Israel right now says on the website, in the chat, wish we had Ethiopian leadership from Israel that would speak to U.S. audiences. Just returned from Jerusalem, and a young Ethiopian security guard was in charge within Mamilla Mall. This is nothing. Blacks are fully integrated into Israel. Is there discrimination? Yeah, there's discrimination amongst all groups. The country is dominated by the Sephardic Jews. They think they're better than anybody else. The Ashkenazic Jews think they're better than everybody else. Remember, Israel is a place where everybody thinks they are kings, and they're really just princes and princesses. And so we're all equal, but everybody wants to be a little more equal. It's not just the Ethiopians in Israel who are black and thriving. I remember working with the Black Hebrews from New Jersey and Detroit who had illicitly established their settlements in the Israeli desert. I worked very closely with them. I fought to get them their rights, even though they were very anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. And now we look at their sons and daughters, and they're in the military. So there is a great deal of equality for people of color within Israel, because remember, half the country is non-European, at least half the country. In fact, 20% is Arab. Okay, thank you for that question. Razi, you got another question? Put it in, Razi. And where are you located? Dahlia in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Will the Republicans impeach Biden if they take control of the House? Yes. And they'll also impeach Mayorkas and Garland. I don't think we need any more than that. Impeach about 4 or 5 other individuals within the government. Remember, it's only a majority vote of a single committee to impeach in the House, and then a majority vote of the entire House to impeach. Impeach only means indict. Then there is the trial, and I don't think any of those will be successful because there just aren't 2/3 within the Senate. Trevor in San Diego, have you ever felt unsafe in any of your investigations? What was your most dangerous moment? Well, I think one of them was in Cairo, Illinois. That's at the bottom of Illinois, below the Mason-Dixon line, or pretty near the Mason-Dixon line. The American Medical Association, I was just a kid back then, and young whippersnapper reporter. And the American Medical Association had a consumer publication called Today's Health with beautiful covers. And they assigned me, due to my involvement with the topic, to go down to investigate the Klan. And they considered at that time, which was in the early 70s, race and racism to be a true medical or socio-medical disease. And at that time, the Cairo Blacks had a boycott against the Klan businesses. And when I tried to get into the middle of all that, at the time I was in a motel, and I had 2 different rooms, for security purposes. I had one under observation and one I stayed in. And I heard they were looking for me, the guys in the Klan. And so I snuck out of my second room, and they saw me, and I got into my rented car, and they chased me with shotguns in an actual pickup truck. There were no Klan's outfits, but they were chasing me, and I ended up in Paducah, Kentucky. I went right to the sheriff's office, and I was safe. So that was one. Let's see what else I had. Oh yeah, I did investigate the taxi cab business for mob operations in Chicago. The taxi cabs were regulated based on their expense, and they were self-dealing with all these fake gangster corporations to increase their expense. And I did have a .357 Magnum put up against my temple right there. It's a very big gun by a guy who said he could shoot me if I didn't back away. At that time, I was working for the NBC affiliate in Chicago. So that was worrisome a little bit, but just a little bit. And then there was the case of the skinheads. When I did my famous investigation of the skinheads, I went undercover, and they had just crucified one of their own people for going to the police and giving information. And here I'm investigating them. Well, they never found me out, but then I was invited after my articles to go on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And that was the famous show in which they called her a monkey. And she said she would never have them on again. I warned her not to have them on the show. The cops wanted to escort me out the back door. The number one racist guy there, a guy called Metzger, threatened to kill me right then and there. And I said, I'm going out the front door. And the next day, Oprah Winfrey was on the Johnny Carson show and said she would never do that again. And then a day or two later, Geraldo, who's now on Fox, investigated them, and they hit him in the nose with a chair, and he had his famous broken nose. But I got to him first, before the broken nose, and before Oprah. And I think my last most dangerous one was a couple years ago when I investigated 501c3s financing terrorist groups and anti-Israel agitators in Judea and Samaria, also called the West Bank. I went into a little town called Deir Itzia, and the town was so dangerous, my military escorts wouldn't even come in with me, and even my private security personnel would not. And a lot of people thought that I would, that I'd get shot there, but actually I wasn't. So basically, it's all risk, but it's managed risk. You know, if you're gonna go surfing, don't complain that the waves are high. Thank you very much for the question. Greta in New Orleans. Are the progressives trying to resegregate America? Yes, they are. Now, I've spent my life documenting injustice and inequity among many groups, the Armenians, the Uyghurs, the Namibians, blacks in America, the enslaved gypsies, also known as Roma, many, many groups. This history needs to be taught, but we don't need to go backwards. Now I see they have something called POC housing. That means that it's housing for people of color. What does that mean? Sounds like only one color can get there. And what if you violate the one-drop rule? The 1928 Virginia Racial Integrity Act. Are you half black or half white? So I'm opposed to segregating or separating people physically or emotionally on the basis of race, while at the very same time making it clear what happened in this country, okay? What happened in this country, not for one or two generations, not for just a massacre or something, but for well over a century or two. So yes, you also ask, what did Israel do to the Germans in their midst? They didn't do anything to them. A large number of the Jews in Israel, when the state started right after the Holocaust, were in fact German Jews. Thank you for your question. Trevor M. in Houston. Doesn't the extreme historic drought in parts of Texas prove climate change is the world's biggest threat? Trevor, that was last week. I got this several days ago, and at that time, there was a historic drought in that part of Texas where you're from, and the next day, the rains came, and now it's the wettest time in history for Texas. That doesn't mean that climate change is not real. You'd be a fool to think that there's no such thing as climate change. How is it possible that the earth is organic? It has many moving parts, many breathing parts. They all interact. We're in an interglacial age. Trying to figure out who's responsible for the climate change is less important than dealing with it. And I'm hoping that we do deal with it. But that part of Texas no longer has historic drought. It's now got a historic drenching. Jake in Fort Worth. You have spoken about a looming civil war. I see we're getting some Texas questions here. You have spoken about a looming civil war. What did you think of Biden's attempt to smear half the country as fascist? Horrible. Horrible. Most people don't know what fascism is. Even some of my best researchers a day or two ago even falsely thought that Stalin was a fascist. Now look, there were four main fascists, and they started in the 20th century. The first one was Mussolini. And the word fascism comes from fascia, or the eight-sided axe, ceremonial axe that Roman leaders used to use and that Mussolini resurrected as a symbol. So he set the stage for fascism. He had Roman salute, which Hitler then copied. Hitler frequently said he copied his patterns after Mussolini. So there was Mussolini, there was Hitler, there was Franco in Spain, and there were the Japanese government. Those were the four main fascists. What did they do? They murdered people, they tortured them, they had concentration camps, the rape of Nanking, the extermination camps of Eastern Europe and the concentration camps of Germany, the expulsion and subjugation of ethnic peoples in Italy, the actions that Italy took in North Africa, Northeastern Africa. All of these things is what the fascists have done. Is there anybody in the Republican Party asking for trains? Is there anyone in the Republican Party asking to seize property? Is there anyone in the Republican Party trying to segregate anyone? No. So I would just remind you that after the French Revolution, largely within a 10-month period, starting in the summer of 1793, the Committee on Public Safety killed more than 16,500 people, mainly by the public guillotine executions, and an additional 10,000 died in prison without trial. And anyone could be condemned with the label, and the label was bourgeoisie. As Stalin's regime of terror labeled enemies counter-revolutionaries. Hitler's regime also used the term counter-revolutionaries. But get this, by the time George Orwell's book in 1984 came out, Big Brother made his universal scapegoat Goldstein, okay? Goldstein. So I have heard the Democratic candidate for governor say, if you say to almost a majority of Floridians, if you supported DeSantis, if you voted for him, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I've heard Democratic mayors say, get out of my state, go to Florida, we don't want you here. This has got to stop. Whatever I said in 2019 about a civil war, whatever I said in 2020 about a civil war, whatever I said early this year about a civil war, has been massively escalated by the remarks of Biden, who is deliberately trying to trade on fear. You got to stop it, man, okay? Stop it, man. You cannot stigmatize half the country because there are elements within the right and elements within the left who are nuts, and they'll listen to what you say, and they'll do things like shoot up the baseball game like one of the Bernie bros did and almost kill numerous congressmen. They'll take out their guns and try to attack people on the left. There are people who are hijacking or trying to hijack the Democratic Party, and they're doing it successfully. And these are people who are trading in hate. There are people on the right, these David Duke types, the Oath Keepers, all these fringe guys, including the ones with horn on their head, who seem to have found refuge in the Republican Party, but they actually aren't in the Republican Party. They have nothing to do with the Republican Party. Rand Paul is not even a Republican. He's a libertarian. Bernie Sanders is not even a Democrat. He is a self-avowed, self-identified socialist. And we have this curious thing here, right out of Stalin, right out of Orwell. Listen up. The Democrats spent $43 million to promote and elect what they consider to be extremist Republicans so that they can now run around and call them fascists. Why did you spend so much money to help them defeat the mainstream, the ordinary, the people who want to work across the aisle? You will never be forgiven for what you have done to American politics. Support your own people and let the democratic process play out for the libertarians, the socialists, the Democrats, and the Republicans. Thank you for your question, Jake in Fort Worth. Beautiful city, and yes, I was able to cut a rug in Fort Worth. Gerald in London. How was Israel able to zero in on one single apartment during the recent Gaza war with Islamic Jihad? Well, according to my contacts in the IDF, and especially the Israeli Artillery Corps, drones conducted more than 2,000 hours of flight time in about 100 sorties during the 66 hours of Operation Breaking Dawn that lasted over a 3-day period last month in August. Dozens of targets were hit by these drones, mainly using the Elbit Hermes 450. You haven't heard much about that. It's operated by the Israeli Air Force 161st Squadron and the Artillery Corps Unit 5252 from the Palmachim Air Base off the Tel Aviv coast. And if you want to know how to get there, first you have a nice cup of coffee on the Tel Aviv beach, then you head north about 20 minutes, you take a right turn, and you can get right there. So that's how it was done. And the commitment is that they would try to take out legitimate military targets and with as little collateral damage as possible. Compare that to what Islamic Jihad did, what Hamas has done, firing thousands upon thousands of unguided missiles. That's against international law, against Israeli targets from Jerusalem to Ashkelon. Thank you, Gerald. Let's see, we have some more questions here. They're coming in live. Okay. Lawrence in London. Hello, Lawrence. And once again, we give our strong condolences to the entire nation. In fact, it gives me reason to have another drink. For the Queen. The social media companies spread a narrative of hate and delegitimization of Israel, which drives anti-Semitism, hate, and radicalization. The policing of the internet is pathetic at best. Their filters let through millions of nasty posts. Self-regulation does not work. What is the best way to make them take responsibility? Jail and 6-digit fines might be a start. We have a law here called Section 230 of one of the larger Communications and Decency Acts. And that gives them total right to publish anything they want with full immunity, even though they're editing it, even though they're filtering it, even though they're moderating it and have exercise over it. Now, you could print a libelous statement in the Washington Post, or even half libelous, and Johnny Depp sue from here to kingdom come. But if it goes on the internet, apparently they have immunity. So the first thing we need to do is to repeal Section 230. The second thing we need to do is Elon Musk needs to go ahead and get past his shenanigans, lower the price of Twitter and buy it outright, and then run it as a free speech platform. I believe in free speech. I fought for free speech, but free speech is the fist, and the fist stops becoming free and harmless when it comes close to the nose. So the free speech that does not harm another individual continues to be free. Even anti-Semitic pamphlets are legal. And those of us who defend the Jewish community know that freedom of speech prevails, even hate speech. But when the hate translates to action, then when it harms someone, then we take steps. Thank you for that, Lawrence. Say hello to your wife. How do we get rid of Pelosi? Says Phyllis in Jerusalem. I believe she'll be relieved of duty in the coming months if the Republicans can retake the House. Now, this big red wave that we've all been talking about might be just a lot of hype, and it might tend to be a little pink trickle. But I do believe that the House will become Republican according to every historical and statistical indicator. She has already indicated she wishes to then be appointed the ambassador to Rome. Okay, now just a word to the wise. If you're going to be appointed ambassador to Rome and you want to go out to a nice restaurant, just make sure your car doesn't run down anyone on those little side streets. Because when my taxi was running down the side streets of Rome, people had to jump out of the way with their chairs. So that's how you get rid of Pelosi, legally, juridically, electorally. Thank you for your question, Miss Barr. Betty in Cincinnati. Have you done a show on wokeness in the military? If not, would you consider doing one? And do you know any retired military personnel to speak about it? I know lots of people who would love to speak about this. There's so much to complain about, so much to talk about. We also like to talk about the good things in life. and we like to talk about what we need to do to protect our children and our grandchildren. So it's a big, strong issue. It's a big, strong story. And if there's any organization that does not need to be woke, it's the military. That does not mean that the military should not be reformed for some of the bad things that it does, including its treatment of women within its ranks. Thank you, Betty, and I'll addressing Cincinnati sometime later this month, or next month, excuse me. Daniel in Mexico City. Since legal action has shut down all the Palestinian banks paying terrorist salaries because they're all afraid of legal action, how is it that these payments are still continuing? Because the Palestinian Authority has illegally corrupted the post office, Palestinian Authority post office, to start cashing checks, money orders. And since they can't shut down the Palestinian Authority post office, they're still giving out millions of dollars to people for slitting the throats of babies and shooting people on the beach in Tel Aviv. In fact, just a few hours ago, they arrested a guy in Jaffa with an automatic machine gun hiding in his bag. Thank you very much for that question, Daniel, and I hope to see you in Mexico, you and your friends. I don't know you personally, but look me up when I get to Mexico next year. Okay, Rachel in Evanston. 5 days after the Hunter Biden laptop broke, 51 senior intelligence officers signed a public letter stating the story was probably Russian disinformation. How was that corrupt letter achieved so quickly? That's a great question, Rachel in Evanston. And I used to live just a few feet away from the Evanston border, just outside Chicago. No one really knows, but it's got to be investigated because it's all false. As everybody knows, the Hunter Biden laptop, as advertised, was never denied, never rebutted by anyone in the Biden family, least of all Hunter. He actually admitted to many of these excesses with gun running and prostitution and drug running in his own autobiographies and audio tapes. So we don't have the answer, but it gives us pause. If the intelligence community can do that, 51 of our best and brightest within 5 days singing a unanimous song of falsity about a major matter that affected the American electorate, what are they doing now? So we need to think. It's an excellent question. Ruben in Vancouver, thinking about the Trump raid, what does the term overclassification mean? Well, that's a fascinating question, Ruben, and I'm glad you gave that to me this morning. Overclassification is a term that everyone in the intelligence business knows. That means you take something that's not secret and you declare it confidential, just to give it more gravitas and attention. You take secret, you up-classify it to top secret to CSI, special compartmentalized sensitive information. And there is a nearly universal belief in Washington that many documents are vastly over-classified, meaning they have no business being classified, and that is why they're being declassified. And I myself have arranged for many documents to be declassified in my research involving the Nazis. But I can tell you, there is so much unanimity and universal understanding in Washington that papers are overclassified. They actually passed a law against it. And that law is the Reducing Overclassification Act in 2010, Public Law 11-258. That's right, there's an actual law against overclassification. It means that if you've got a place called Mar-a-Lago, which has had the documents there for years, and you're shipping boxes there, there's an assumption that there's a bunch of classified documents there. The fact that there were only 11, and were they classified or not, I don't know. But I do know that the president couldn't go right next door a few feet away to the presidential dining room with an SCI document because there's no SCIF or sensitive confidential setting for those documents to exist in. He couldn't do that unless they were automatically declassified as soon as he walked out the door. Remember, the number one classifier in chief is the president, and there's no actual obligatory proven form that the president must fill out to declassify. Thank you for your question. Reuven in Vancouver, some of the best seafood on planet Earth. Cindy in Newark, Delaware. Okay, Delaware. Newark. What about the Russian rapes in the Ukraine? Well, Russia has a military culture of rape as a military weapon. It's in their military tradition. Millions were raped in World War I. In World War II, there were 2 million Russian rapes in Germany alone. We now see that women are being raped right now in Ukraine. There's a special war crimes prosecutor who's looking into just these rapes. They're often gang rapes. That is what the Russians have done. And if you've got the Russian army, you're gonna have Russian rape. That's a fact. I also want to mention there are Ukrainian atrocities perpetrated against Russian POWs. I've seen the pictures about what is done to their eyeballs and to their bodies, and I will not share them with you, but I remember one was shared where they actually twisted and torqued a bunch of Russian bodies into a special symbol to cause horror. So yes, there's Ukrainian atrocities, but they pale in comparison to the institutional use of rape by the Russian military. And I should tell you, not only does the Russian military have a vast record of mass rape in Germany and Poland and other places, but many militaries have employed rape. Many militaries. The Pakistani military actually institutionally raped almost every woman in Bangladesh that could be raped. And there are many other examples. Thank you for that painful question, Cindy. Luann in Pittsburgh. Ben and Jerry say their social values dictate who Lever can sell to, including whether they can sell to people in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Do they have a case? No way, Jose. Let me explain something. And I actually have the Ben and Jerry's social value statement here. It's mainly 3 little funny boxes. It is so vague. One says human rights and dignity. We are committed to honoring the rights of all people to live with liberty, security, self-esteem, and freedom of expression and protest, and to have the opportunity to provide for their own needs and contribute to society. So they believe in everybody's right to protest. Does that include Charlottesville? Does that include the race riots in the South? It's too vague. And what if it changes? What if the times change? What if other matters here about environmental protection, restoration, and regeneration? And suddenly they say, well, I think we should not sell ice cream in states that are still running internal combustion machines. They could do that. It's all up for grabs. It's all vague. The leadership could change and suddenly decide we don't want to sell to any Republicans, especially ultra MAGAs, because this has been laughingly declared to be an enemy of the state by the Biden administration. By the way, all these ultra MAGA guys, whoever they are just laughing about this. It's just silly. So it's too vague. Now, if this goes to court, if it really goes to court, the judge is going to set it aside and say it's unenforceable. They could as easily say, you're going to run this company according to my happiness. These companies are owned by millions of individuals, foundations, stock funds, union funds, retirement funds, and they have a duty to all of those people. Now, they could certainly say, we're not going to sell in China because of the Uyghurs. They could certainly talk about pulling their products out of Arab countries where women are treated like dirt, but that's not what they're doing. They're asking to pull their products out of the Jewish state and the Jewish homeland under the false and completely fabricated view that the land is occupied, which it is not. Next question. Thank you, Luann in Pittsburgh. Tony in Miami. Can the government seize our bank accounts? Should we invest in gold? And the answer is The government can seize anything it wants. It can seize all your gold. My wife is constantly saying, let's invest in gold. If the government wants to seize your gold, they can seize your gold. Now, how do I know? Because Franklin D. Roosevelt, a famous Democrat, made Executive Order 6102, force all American citizens to sell all of their gold, bullion, and coins, legitimate coins, at a below market rate. This pursuant to the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. They can do it, and under certain circumstances, I assure you that they will do it. Not this year, not next year, but in the latter part of this century if things don't go the right way. So yes, they can seize your bank accounts, they can seize your assets, and they can seize your gold coins, whether you're holding them or they're being held by Rosalind Capital. Nothing on Rosalind. Melinda in Washington, D.C. The Arabs were partners with the Nazis in World War II and adopted Nazi ideology. Do they still employ Nazi ideology? And the answer is yes. The PA right now has a law that it's a death sentence to sell to a Jew any property. You're not allowed to have a Jewish sign in a store or a Hebrew sign in a store. So let's say you're selling a Hebrew product like Strauss ice cream or noodles or soup or anything like that. You can't have a Hebrew sign. You're not allowed to shake hands with a Hebrew, with an Israeli or Jewish person. You're not allowed to sell anything to a Jewish person. The word they use is settlers, but the only Jews who are coming in there are, of course, the people who are legitimately settled in the areas where they're allowed to settle under Oslo. So anyway, it's hard to think that people following this type of a creed could possibly believe they're in line for their own state. And I've spoken about this, and you'll be able to see that on our website. When I talked about is the two-state solution viable? You'll see it at our YouTube channel. And yes, I see your sign here. Did Kuwait close a jewelry shop for selling a Jewish star? Yes, Kuwait closed a jewelry shop for selling a touristy Jewish star. Although you can get a Jewish star and a cross and a Muslim crescent almost in any tourist shop anywhere in Israel. Let's see, we've got some more questions here. They're coming in live. I'm getting tired, folks. Wes Headley. Scientists have stated that humans are responsible to speed and magnitude of global warming. 99.9%. Is that all? Just 99.9%, Wes? Of all published studies corroborate this, and 97% of all climate scientists stand by this theory. Do you believe this is true? What's the difference if I believe it or not? Ask yourself that question, Wes. What is the difference? There is climate change. We can say it's because of what the Chinese are doing with their coal plants. We can talk about the internal combustion machine. There is climate change. It's real. It's now. There's been climate change going on for many, many generations, thousands of years, even millions of years. Do I believe that there is climate change now? I said so earlier. No one needs a scientific study to verify that. So yes, I believe that. Do I believe these various studies which have come out? Some of them are good, some of them are bad. What's important is I don't need a study to tell me that it's hot outside. And I don't need a study to tell me that some of the creeks are dried up. And I don't need a study to tell me that the icebergs are melting and the ice shelf is melting. We need to do something about it. And we can do a lot more about it if we work together instead of trying to put people in silos and see who's a climate denier and who's not a climate denier. I believe in climate change. I said so myself. I wrote an entire book about it. Internal combustion, which won 4 major awards, including the Thomas Edison Award and Green Globes, because I was convinced that oil and the internal combustion machine were at the root of climate change. Got it, Wes? Here's another question from Wes. Did Donald Trump not recently declare at a large rally that Joe Biden is the enemy of the state? Yes, he did. And you actually knew that before you asked me the question. So you asked me the question solely to see if I would answer it. Yes, he did. He and many other people, including within the Democratic Party, are believing that Joe Biden by going out on the stump and not talking about his record, but trying to get half the country to change the other half, a very dangerous element in our world today. Let's see. Thank you for your questions, Wes. And now I'm being told I'm out of time. So yes, we are out of time. My God, I went over 25 minutes, but I had so many questions, wonderful questions. I want to thank my talented international team, including 3 in the Detroit area, Lance, Bert, and Martin, as well as many others around the world. I'll see everyone here next week, 3 p.m. Eastern. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to theedwinblackshow.com/support. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon platform in 190 countries across this planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and The Far Hood. You want an autographed copy? Hit my personal website, edwinblack.com. Soon I'll be with Shopify, and click Order Books. You can get passwords and access alerts to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show and click that notification button. You will love them. We put new ones up each week. We've got 1 or 2 planned for next week. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. And my closing word of wisdom repeats the one I said before. In peace, sons bury their fathers as is natural, but in war, fathers bury sons, and that is most unnatural. I have the right to say it without being asked to change the pronouns. And I, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm zooming out.